Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry Live. If any of you saw my teaser on Facebook tonight, we are talking about one of my all-time favorite TV shows. Well, not really. That's not really what we're talking about. But we are talking about one of my favorite shows and one of the characters that I absolutely love on television, which is Olivia Pope. And tonight I'm going to tell you what are some of the top 5 things that I've actually learned from Olivia Pope that have helped me as a teacher. So if you have never watched Scandal, it's off the air now, but it just finished last season. It was its last season. If you have never seen Scandal, Olivia Pope is a fixer in Washington, D.C., and she fixes problems, and she's also kind of like a PR strategist, or at least that's how she starts at the beginning of the season. So what could a PR strategist ever have to teach teachers what they can do in the classroom? So it made me think about what is coming up this week, and what happens to teachers all the time is that we are often required to justify our own jobs, and we are questioned continuously on the things that we're doing in our classroom. And we have a lot of stakeholders that have opinions on what happens in our classroom. And one of the ways that we can help ourselves be successful so that we can cut through all of that questioning is to really learn how to control the message and be a bit of a spin doctor ourselves, in the sense that, not in a bad way, we're not trying to manipulate people, but getting ahead of the curve and ahead of the message sometimes helps us so that we can spend less time defending ourselves and more time getting to the business of actually teaching. The 5 things Olivia Pope has taught me. The first one is confidence. Confidence is key. She didn't care who you were. She was going to walk into a room and she took up space. And I know that sometimes you might not feel the most confident, or especially if you're new to that grade or new to the school, that confidence might not be something that you're feeling on the inside, but it definitely should be something that you're trying to project on the outside. So it's something that you can totally fake it until you make it. So some of the things that you can do to project confidence is simply just to sit up straight and take up more space. If you are taking up less space and you're closing in your body language is automatically projecting that you're feeling less confident. So if you end up taking up more space, and that could simply just be at a table or when you're sitting at a meeting, you take up the space that you are owed as that professional. And it's okay to take up that space. So that's one of the ways that you can project more confidence. Another way is to do a power stand. Now, this is kind of goofy. You probably don't want to do this in front of others. You might look a little strange, but sometimes if you're going into a meeting and you know that you're going to have to, say, defend what you're doing, whether it's going in with your principal, if you get called down to the principal's office, which still kind of weirds me out, even though my principal is fantastic. It's the whole thought of going down to the principal's office. Or if you know you're going to have a tough parent meeting, it's going to be really strange, but try a power move. So let me show you what that is. So here we go. Okay. So if you are standing, I don't think I can go further back. So you can see there, for a power move, what you're looking at doing is you have your feet shoulder width apart, and your hands on your hips, and you are literally just going to stand like Superman and kind of puff out your chest. It's weird. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, say, while people are watching you. But if you are in a classroom before somebody comes in, even standing there telling yourself in a power stand that you can do this, you've got this, you know what you're doing, sometimes that's just enough to make you feel confident that you can kind of get yourself in the mood and get yourself prepped and kind of psyched up for perhaps something that might be a little bit difficult. Another one is that you want to make eye contact with the people that you're talking. So you definitely, as you're talking, if they're talking to you, you want to make eye contact with them. You don't want to stare them down, but you definitely want to be making eye contact with while they're talking or while you're talking. If there's multiple people in the room, you may want to bounce back through who you're talking to, but you definitely want to make eye contact with the people that you're meeting with. You also want to use silence as your power. So we want to often fill in pauses and silence with words. So sometimes confidence, it's easier if you can take those pauses, especially if you're taking those pauses in poignant moments in what you're saying, using those pauses to your advantage to control the conversation and control what's happening, and to show that there is some ownership and confidence in what you're saying. Sometimes a pause is very powerful. So use those as you can. Now, you're going to have to use these, this is not just something that you're going to use, say, with parents, but this in your teaching career, you've probably been questioned by a consultant, a principal, other teachers, your own students, or parents, or just family members as they're wondering why the heck you're doing the things that you're doing in your classroom. Unfortunately, the reality is, as teachers, we're questioned all the time. So having strategies that allow you to be ahead of those and to get ahead of those questions, know the answers ahead of time, often will help you so that you are more prepared for those. Getting ready for parent-teacher interviews often means that I will have people questioning what I've been doing in my classroom, or I'm meeting with administrators, or I'm meeting with consultants, and they're often questioning the things that are done in my classroom. I find the more I push boundaries in my own class, the more I have to justify why I am doing what I'm doing. And that's just a reality of what's happening, especially when my classroom doesn't look like a classroom did when people were in school themselves. I am then forced to almost justify what I'm doing more often in my classroom. So one of the things that I will do is prepare for that is I will try to listen to the complaints and respond without getting defensive or protectionist. So I definitely want to listen to what their complaints may be. I want to validate some of their concerns and really look at what the root cause is for, say, parents as to why they might be upset with certain things that might be happening in my classroom. I often find times that parents have the best intentions, and really it all comes down to the fact that they love their son or daughter and they just want them to be successful. And perhaps that deep-seated thing is, if they don't do well in grade 4 now, that might mean that that child's going to live with for the rest of their life. And that might not be something that they want. They want their children most likely to be successful and to be happy and to do well. So if they have concerns or anxieties that might not be happening, or they're definitely seeing for their concerns, but then also standing your ground and being able to explain why it is you're doing the things that you're doing in your classroom and being well thought out, which leads me into my next point, which is learn how to justify the things you're doing in your classroom. So if you are learning to become the expert, so you're learning your curriculum, you know the proper pedagogy in your classroom, you can tie the things that you're doing in your class to best practices. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing exactly the same thing in that best practices say it should look like, but it's about looking at what you're doing in your classroom and making it fit into what the best practices are, because chances are you're probably doing a great job at what you are doing in your classroom, but it's about looking at how to fit that in with what people are saying are going to be best practices. So if they're saying, you want to use inquiry in your classroom, how are you using inquiry in your classroom? Look at the things that you're doing where you're posing for your students, where they have to find the answers themselves. And that's how you're using inquiry in your classroom. They're wondering, if you've got parents who are concerned, well, then look at what you're doing and explain. Another thing that you should try to do in your classroom, another thing that Olivia Pope taught me, was it's better to play offense than defense. So one of the things that you may want to think about is If you know that you're doing something that might be difficult as translated through a 9-year-old when they go home, or if somebody walks into your classroom and it's not glaringly obvious what you are doing and why you are doing it, so you may have the justification, but you're concerned that somebody else may not make those leaps. It's okay to walk them through that ahead of time. So it's okay to say to a parent and give them a heads up that this is what you're doing and this is why you're doing it. When you do that before, instead of playing defense and waiting for the student to go home and say, oh, today all we did was play soccer all day long, the parents might get their backs up and wonder, well, why did you play soccer all day long? But if they know ahead of time that your plan is to go out and plan this entire math project that's related to playing soccer, and the students did all of the math work to plan it, then when their child comes home and says they played soccer all day, the parent has a frame of reference in which to put that information in. You have a container. You've built the container for them so that they can understand what's happening in the classroom. So when their child comes home and gives them the very brief explanation that focuses all on the fun and maybe not so much on the learning, the parent has the ability to understand what's happening. Same with your administrator. If your administrator just sees that you're going outside and playing soccer for 100 minutes and wonders why you're spending so much time out in the field, they might be questioning what it is you're doing and whether learning is actually happening in your classroom. And there may not be contrary. Maybe it just looks like you're playing outside with everybody. It's okay to explain to people what it is you're doing and brag a little bit about what you're doing so that people, when they see you playing outside, they understand that there's an immense amount of learning that might be happening behind what it is they're seeing. This way, they don't draw the wrong conclusions about what you're doing. This is especially important in an inquiry classroom, where if anybody at any point in time in the day walks in, it might look a little chaotic. The kids, if they're super engaged, it might look like they're having way too much fun and that learning actually isn't happening. So you might want to think about how you can communicate that learning is actually happening in your classroom before it happens, so that when people can come in, they can see it with the right frame of reference. They can build the container around and so the story that they're seeing in front of their eyes makes sense because you've given them some of that background knowledge. And I think that that's really important, and it definitely helps to alleviate some of those concerns that you might face later on as people are wondering and drawing different conclusions about whether or not learning is actually happening in your classroom. You know it is, but trying to give people the understanding that they also know that it is. So offense is often better than defense. So it's always better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. I would flip that. I'm not saying you should be asking permission, but you certainly want to get ahead of the game here and not always ask for forgiveness after it's happened, especially if what you're doing might or could be misconstrued as not what you're supposed to be doing. Another thing Olivia Pope told me, and this is an important one, is watch your tone and know your audience. Now, this is a tricky one because this changes no matter where you're teaching. Everybody's audience is going to be different, and you're going to have to change how you're explaining what's happening in your classroom. The same thing, the same tone, or the same messaging that you might send in, say, one area that has that may a low socioeconomic status may be completely different from where you have a high immigrant population, from where you have a very where you could have an affluent population or a mixed, diverse population. All of your messaging is going to have to change and reflect the audience in which you are speaking to. And identifying what tone and what phrases and looking at that background knowledge, because that, where your audience is coming from, is going that you're making if you're sending out written correspondence versus how you're communicating in a parent-teacher conference, or how you are even showing up to work and how you're dressed every day. These things change depending on who your target audience is and who you're trying to convey this message to. And I think you have to be very conscious about this because it's not going to be the same for every single teacher. this is my 11th or 12th year teaching. I can never remember. But in all of the schools that I've taught at, knowing who the audience is that you're serving, knowing the students, the families, their background history with the school system, what their misconceptions are, what their expectations are of you as a teacher, what their feelings are towards education, what their pedagogical understanding is of education, and even their parenting styles all changes depending on where you are teaching. And being responsive to that and not necessarily using the same messaging at different places is going to be different, because it could get you in a lot of hot water in one school versus another school. It wouldn't even matter, and that's how you should be saying things. So think about how you're telling parents that a test is coming up. So if you are teaching in an area and you're telling them about a test, if you've got a community that is very active and involved and invested in their child's learning, and they are in tutoring and they are doing homework every night, and the parents are doing their own homework program, and they're every single night and they're super invested, and then you go ahead and say, we just did a test, it wasn't so great, don't forget to study. It sounds fairly innocent. However, if you're asking parents, if you're reminding them, don't forget to study because previously what you have done, students didn't do so well at, so that must mean you didn't study. That sometimes will get the parents on the defensive because they in fact were studying with their kids the whole time. And it makes them think that you think they're not doing a great job as a parent. Versus at another school, completely different school, where the parents might not be doing those things, which is totally fine. A reminder that maybe their kids would need help studying would be a perfectly acceptable and appropriate suggestion for parents, because they may not have that experience where it would be a parent's role or responsibility to be that actively involved in their children's education. It's just not an expectation from when they were kids. So they would never think to do that. And it's just not part of the norms of their family that a parent would need to be programming after school an entirely different homework program that might be different from what a teacher assigns. Telling that parent that the student might need extra help studying would be totally appropriate. So same message, different audience, the interpretation of that message will totally change. So it's something definitely to consider as to what school you're teaching at and who that audience is. So those are my 5. Oh, and there was another one on my Facebook page. What else did Olivia Pope teach me? That it's okay to enjoy a lovely glass of wine every once in a while. On a Friday night at the end of a hectic week, it's all right to enjoy a glass of wine and just chill on the couch and watch a movie. So those are 6 things I've learned from Olivia Pope. So number 1 was fake it till you make it. Project that confidence, because confidence is key. Number 2 is listen and respond to complaints or objections without getting defensive, and listen reflectively and with empathy. So those are the 6 things I have learned from Olivia Pope and how they have helped me as a teacher. I hope it's giving you something to think about tonight. So thank you so much for joining me. This blog post, or this video, is a blog post on my website of www.madlylearning.com. And by the end of the week, this video will have a YouTube replay and a podcast replay available, and as well as the transcript written from this video, so you can read it if you don't want to watch it. And you can find that all on the show's website at www.teachingwithinquiry.com. Now, I have November coming up. I have some exciting things planned for November where we'll talk a little bit more about assessment,